Okay, so we can go around and do introductions, and I'll start. Odessa, Washington, with Kennett Square Youth and Family Teams. I'm a youth support partner.
What are you doing this for today?
For my video for Train the Trainer.
Okay, cool.
Tamika Bosley, family support partner, Kennett Square. Family Teams.
I don't know, you're adding to that. Karen Lee, family support partner.
Laura Fletcher, facilitator.
Terry Kaiser, facilitator.
Casey Sachs, facilitator.
Dana Fisher, coach, supervisor, Delaware County.
Thank you. Because mine is Stacy. Okay, and so we were going to talk about crisis planning and more so the youth support role in crisis prevention planning in the High Fidelity process. And so for the start of the conversation, I wanted to talk about what the youth support partner needs from facilitators through crisis prevention planning. Saying a lot.
It's okay.
Chill out, it's all good.
So when I think about when I'm preparing for functional assessment and crisis prevention, I think I tend to really connect to the facilitators in that. At least I try to. I feel that I need to know that I'm on the right track with what was talked about when prevention planning was introduced. Am I hearing correctly that this is the crisis behavior that was agreed upon as a team to gather information around? Am I missing anything that has been shared from the professionals before meeting with the youth so that I can get as much of their voice as possible in the document? The time frame, I like to know from facilitators how long they have between now and the meeting to get the document complete for functional assessment so that I can have the information to them in that time frame. And hopefully earlier so that I can go back and make sure if I see something on the document, if I could get that before the meeting, I can take it back to the youth and see if there's any other parts of their voice that could be added, knowing that everyone's voice has been gathered. So that would be something that I would also need from the facilitators trying to stay in that time frame as a full team together. From family support partners, it's always helpful to know. We know how much families' perspectives are different, so it's helpful to know what the parents are feeling and thinking along the way. Sometimes we like to go out separately and then a time that we can go out together, but not with like the youth and the family. Sometimes I like to bring a family support partner with me to see a youth if I know it's one of those situations where the family's struggling with blaming and shaming or the perspectives are so opposite, to help us come back together in between and see how we can support the family in finding what the actual bottom lines are. And
Because the parents are always right.
parents are always right, parents are always wrong from the youth, and so
Yeah.
I think that's what I need the most with family supports is just really coming together and syncing together with the information that we're getting. And I think that ultimately best supports the functional assessment too.
See what I can do.
And then for what I feel the facilitators need from me would be to really get as much accurate information as possible, detailed information as possible. Having some quotes I think is helpful in functional assessment to show where the youth's voice was really coming from, and making sure that I try my best to have all areas of the functional assessment information gathering completed in those time frames. Is there anything else?
Did you say quotes?
Like quotes from the youth,
Okay.
like direct quotes from the family, so that it's not just written as their voice and.
Right.
So is there anything else that you feel you would need from the youth support role?
No, I think that the detailed, the quality information, not just, oh, this is a trigger, this is a trigger, but when is this a trigger, and what is it about it that makes it a trigger? You know, and those rich details that come from getting underneath of the surface stuff.
And Terry's actually just to share, Terry's actually supported me in really, I think, getting that art of hi-fi with functional assessment. And so as I'm gathering, I have like Terry's voice in my head. Well, but what would that look like? So my goal, every youth that I see, is like to have a meeting with Terry where she does not need to ask that question to the youth because it's already there in the functional assessment. So that's been really, I think, from the starts to now, looking at how important the information is for functional assessment and accuracy, and having a plan that's going to really be successful for the family. So my inner Terry has been channeled, but I do think that the functional assessment information is one of the most important, the most important component to prevention planning, and the way the information is gathered could change everything. And so I know that Terry did a coaching a while back around the types of questions we ask, and them being open-ended questions, and not having those biased thoughts come to mind, and just being able to listen and taking that active listening to a new level. And so I think just practicing that really makes a big difference with the families. Terry, Casey, I had asked if there was anything else the facilitators felt they needed
I brought every report I could find.
from the youth support partner in prevention planning, and what I had shared was that I felt they needed really detailed information for the functional assessment, really committed to meeting the time frame that the facilitators need to put a document together, and making sure that I'm sharing where the youth's coming from and where they stand effectively. So is there anything you would add?
No, I think the time frame is just the big one for me.
Well, then the obvious thing is moral support during the crisis prevention planning meeting, because that's so painful for so many. So kids don't want to confront that, or don't face it, and we all know that sometimes they just don't show up or escape, so it's moral support during the meeting.
And then I would say kind of the same for what I believe the family support partner needs from a youth support partner, as far as having that information that I'm gathering, even if it's before the facilitators get like the typed notes. I'd like to tell the family supports as it goes, because they're going to be meeting with the parents.
And that way the parent's not surprised or taken off guard.
And vice versa, because a lot of times if I'm hearing something the parents are saying, I make little notes like, I don't know if the youth would have the same perspective, or could I get them to share what it looks like in connection to what the parents are seeing in a creative way. Because when it happens in the planning meeting, I think that's when we start to struggle with having a successful meeting, the smoothness of prevention planning. Is there anything?
No, I just remember a time that you and I went out to that one family in 253, and it's helpful because the family, when you do it together without the youth there with the family, they could hear better, and you also have somebody, because the crisis behavior is a crisis. People hear things, see things, know things differently. So to have us both there and have a discussion, it's like having stereo on instead of just, a single speaker happening. And so the families can hear it as well.
And
I find it helpful.
I think something that's helped about going together with, especially some families where we see it as a need to go together, the parents are able to hear my story, and as we're gathering information, where they can kind of have some normalcy to their situation and feel some comfort in knowing they're not alone, as well as the support from the family support partner. And I think it goes vice versa, with the family support partners being able to share what they went through with their children, and then how they feel as a parent, and giving that parent perspective. I think it's really good prep for the difficult conversation in a meeting.
I was just going to say that the other thing is that it's been helpful for when you go out or I go out separately and we come back together before we type our notes. Sometimes it looks like the parent and the kid are living in two separate houses, because it's like you have the complete opposite for everything that we've gathered. And so to be able to take that information and just go back and, you go back to the youth, or we go out together, I go back to the parent, and then we say, so can you, why don't you expound on that a little bit, so we can try to gather more, as Terry often talks about, richer information and a deeper understanding and feel of what's really going on.
Right.
And sometimes you need a few times before a parent will, youth I'm sure, will open up and really start to tell you what's really happening. So.
And I think when we do that, we also brainstorm the way we want to go back and ask, like, how do we want to ask those questions? And we give each other ideas of what we could ask that will help us get a more solid answer than the separate answer, because we don't want to go back and get the same response.
Right.
And so I think that I would agree with that. That's been really beneficial for the information we gather. So when I think about what I believe my youth need from me in preparing for crisis prevention is, one, I need to be ready to share my story with crisis, and also the benefits, because I have a crisis plan of my own now, and I love this process. And so I like to share when I talk about, we're going to gather functional assessment information, we're going to do this plan, and really what the next steps are looking like. I use my story as the example of what that looks like, of how I did it. Like I put some information together, I took it to my natural supports at home, this is what we did, we sit down and have a meeting, and now when I come home having a bad day, sometimes they're sitting at the table waiting for me like, we have this plan, and it helps me stay successful. And so a lot of times I find that starts to relax them a little bit, but I like to really get them involved, because when we traditionally doing crisis planning, it's the segue into implementation. So for me, my youth should understand the model, they should already be using their voice in a meeting, they should be connected to the community or natural support, they should have options and people who could be there, and they should be able to feel some comfort in running parts of the meeting. So I like to encourage them to be involved in making their crisis plan. My goal is for them to be co-facilitating that. Doesn't always happen that way, but a lot of times they're ready to say, I'm going to share what I shared in the functional assessment. I want to name my plan the success plan. I don't want the word crisis in my plan's name. And so getting them really involved into knowing, like, this is meant to help you stay successful. We recognize how far you've come. Let's stay where we're at, and let's stay towards your vision and get there and move forward. And so I try to really build it being a positive thing. I also like to review the strengths, needs, culture discovery while I'm doing functional assessment, because in transition we have to update the strength, needs, culture discovery. So if I'm gathering functional assessment information and taking breaks from talking about the crisis and looking back at some of the positives and the strengths and where are we at now, I feel that really helps prepare them for being in the overall implementation phase, but also being more relaxed about having this meeting at all. And then in the meetings, of course, supporting them in being able to hear the positives as well, knowing that we're talking about this is where you're at, we're talking about moving forward, we're talking about staying successful, and reminding them throughout the meeting that the team still sees how far they've come. And when there's blame, we all work very well together in avoiding the blaming and shaming, and supporting parents and team members and seeing, like, okay, but this plan is really meant as staying successful, because I think sometimes just talking about it, we can go back and get stuck in rehashing it. And so all of us working together as a team helps the youth as well, not just what I can contribute in the meeting, just every part that we all play in the meeting really is what causes those families to feel comfort in prevention planning.
And it's good modeling too. Like it's good for the kid, it's good for the parents, because as parents you react to a crisis in your own crisis way. So it's good modeling as a team when we're doing that, and not getting stuck in the mire of the actual crisis.
Right.
And I think it's helpful to our teams that you're so open about sharing that you really live this process. Like, we all buy in, we all believe it, we all really believe that it works, but you live it and implement it in your own life. And sharing that, I think, helps families to continue to have faith in us even when crisis planning is difficult, you know?
Is there anything that you guys have seen, like in the meetings or during functional assessment, other than what we've already talked about, that you feel has really helped support the youth within using my role and my skill sets?
Can you ask that question again? I didn't
Ask it again.
Yes, please.
If there's anything else that you guys have noticed during the crisis prevention planning with our families that we haven't already talked about, that you've seen as being something that's been really helpful for the youth through that process?
I think to have you there during that meeting, which is probably the toughest meeting that we have, I think that's when the youth support is really needed, and to either bring them back to the table or to focus. I mean, that's all about the behavior that is most likely to land them outside the home.
Right.
That's a tough meeting, and without you there, we can't have it. So
And it's hard to keep it from turning into a crisis. And it's also not easy to wrap it up in a way that makes you feel safe leaving the family alone together. So all of that support that everybody, but especially the youth support partner, gives the kid is what works to make it feel like, okay, not only do we have a plan, but we feel like they're not going to argue or fight when we leave, because we know in the beginning that sometimes it's a trigger. They just happen as there is a trigger.
And what I think has helped me be a better support to the youth is, for a while I would focus on the skill sets and functional assessment and like just doing the action steps of that piece and not relaxing enough to focus on how important my role plays into supporting the youth. And so being open to like, how am I going to be creative in changing the feeling that is traditionally around the word crisis, and the crisis plans that they've had to make with all the clinical teams they've had before us.
Right.
How can this plan really be that plan that's different? This process really be that process that's different for them? And so, with talking about like RFI and things of that sort that we talk about, I've been really open to like, Casey, what do you think about this? Terry, can you give me some ideas for this? Getting the youth involved, and then extending my time that I have in prepping them for that meeting, giving them 2 individuals in the week before, and what is our game plan going in to support, and I always say support each other through it, because I really put that support relationship out there through every phase of the process.
That's what I was just going to say, is that like you go into it and define your support relationship, and I think that that's so important for the youth to have that understanding of what that's going to look like for them, what they need, what you need. And that you redefine that through each phase of the process and through crisis planning, I really think helps them to kind of see where they are and what support you're going to be providing and kind of how they're moving through the process.
Right. And that support has been shown by, several youth that I can think of that has just really articulated appropriately what just their different needs are, what they felt during the process and during the the crisis prevention planning, and just showing that they are prepared and prepped for that meeting, So.
And I think though, even as much as prepared and prepped for the meeting, there's still times when they're not able to actually say what needs to be said to have a productive planning meeting. And your support there, the youth support piece there, what it is that they need to say, and that they want to say but can't. And so having that support right then and there, whether it's urging them to use their voice themselves or helping them to use their voice, that information can get out and they can see that it can be shared in a way that's safe, and it kind of gives them that extra that extra push, because it's never easy. I mean, you can be all the prepared that you want to come into it, but when you're in a room with your parents and your behavioral specialist or whoever, and they're all looking at you and they're all thinking that you need to do something, your voice saying, well, I need this, in order to feel supported, is hard for kids to do. And so I think having you there, having the youth support there in the meeting, it's critical to have the youth support in that meeting. I don't think it's a meeting that we could or should have without the youth support present.
I agree. And just that you're so in tune with the youth and their body language and like the things that they're not saying, that you can see if they're shutting down. And say, hey, do you want a break? When they can't say, all right, I need a break. I think that that's something that, kind of prevents meetings from getting to that explosive point.
The only other thing I wanted to say was the importance of crisis planning to the overall process of High Fidelity. And for me, I just think of that experience that we want families to have. I think of where we want them to be at, where they want to be at with their visions and coming towards implementation and transition of our process. That prevention plan is really what kind of gives them that security to stand on as they progress in the process. It's really intimidating. Without a really good crisis plan, I think the family's confidence to grow and pursue their visions really can be impacted if it's not a solid prevention plan that they feel their voices were heard. This is going to work for me. I can try these. I'm practicing it, and people are checking in on me and making sure this plan is working. I think that really is what gives them that extra confidence to grow. And I think that's why we see a lot of families that are in implementation grow so quickly to transition, because they have that prevention plan that they feel confident about and happy with.
And so many of them, their visions involve reducing hospitalizations and not going back to placement. And then they have these crisis plans with clinical teams that involve calling crisis and going to the hospital. And so I think the fact that our prevention plan is about prevention, and it's what steps can you take in your home to prevent all of that from happening. And I think it kind of helps to build their faith in us and in that we really are helping to work toward their vision, because we are trying to keep you out of the hospital. We are trying to keep you out of residential. We're not telling you to just go call crisis. We're trying to help you handle it internally, and that's really what they all want.
And I think something else that, it's just something that I feel, and maybe it's an opinion, but I think it really works for the families in the process. They get these crisis plans that they're used to from a clinical perspective, and then they have functional assessment, and it's asking a lot of open-ended information that they're not used to hashing out in that amount of detail. And it has 3 components to a plan, and they're used to it all fitting on 1 page or 2 pages, and we're giving them pages of these components for them to use as a plan. Some families that I have checked in with, or as we're doing transition and we're hearing what they've learned or what they've liked from the process, a lot of them say to not be as comfortable with crisis, with that prevention plan. When I check in after a meeting and I go to a youth and I ask them how they feel about their prevention plan, and they're saying that it's more helpful, it's a good feeling for Hi-Fi to know why we have the model the way the model is. And I think the families that are so used to staying in constant crisis, that see a plan like that, I see a shift in how their kind of mentality is coming to a planning meeting.
Right. And from a facilitator's perspective, it's not just the families, but our system partners who have given positive feedback. I had a probation officer say, this is the best crisis plan I've ever seen. And it was just about like the kids' input and like being honest and the parents being honest, and everybody just put it out there, and like they came up with this really solid plan to prevent crisis, you know, and to have our system partners see that, I think also builds their faith in our process.
I particularly enjoy JPO and children and youth when they are in a crisis prevention meeting and they're hearing the functional assessment information and they're like, really? And we're like,
makes sense.
children and youth involved 9 years, and they go, huh, and they have that like aha moment through prevention planning, but they get really on board to supporting the families, because how many of them are like, you're doing a crisis prevention plan and then you're moving into another phase, and then what, like and they get just as nervous as the families do sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what I was going to say kind of ties in with that, not only the piece where the behavior gets them into the hospital, but with a lot of my families lately, it seems like until you get a good crisis plan in place, the family cannot plan. That crisis behavior is such an integral part of everything that's going on with that family that they can't plan for anything else. And once the crisis plan gets done and once it becomes effective, the other needs kind of start to resolve themselves, you know, and so it's, I think, I mean, I've had with a couple of families recently, you know, we've had an initial planning meeting and then we've gone right into a crisis plan. We're not doing a full regular plan in place before we get the crisis plan, because that's really all that they're worried about.
Maybe
and you
that's
get that done, and it's easier to move on. Then you can plan around communication. You can plan around better.
You can't communicate when your kid's constantly
exactly.
in the hospital.
You can't communicate when your kid's constantly manipulating or you know, the defiant behaviors and things. Those you don't even want to communicate. So.
And that just triggered me that I have a thought that I actually had when I was thinking about this, and like Band-Aid planning versus crisis planning, and something that I think is important, because there are families, Laura and I have one that we just met, and they have their priority need is that crisis plan. The priority part of their vision is around that crisis behavior. So we introduce doing the prevention plan earlier than we would traditionally to the model. But I think it's important when we do come towards the end of the planning phase to still revisit that plan, but not just revisiting it as, is this plan working, but also asking the families, are there any other crises that could cause this youth to be out of the home? Or this family to break down, because sometimes the crisis, we just shared that how many families get comfortable being in constant crisis. We could have a plan around the crisis that's in the now, but not necessarily the crisis that started this cycle for the family. So I think it's important to revisit it, but also remember to ask for any other crisis behaviors that we should be talking about. I think that's all I really had.
Yeah. Excellent.
Nice. Good job.